Welcome to Write With Me session number 24, where I'm working on Island Dawn on Maui. I'm working on chapter 31 right now. I'm starting to get close to the end of the book. This is a book about a woman who ends up with an unexpected inheritance and ends up in a very forced proximity situation to a very infuriating and yet attractive man. The whole idea is that they're going to go through some real challenging times, especially in chapter number 31, as you'll hear. Let's get this started. Just recording in the voice recorder app, and then I just copy the transcript, and voila. And it's literally built into the iPad and phone, or the iPhone. That's handy. All right, let's do it. Don't want to stop the recording. I did that last time. That was funny. Not really. Okay. Island Dawn on Maui, Chapter 31. Rain began lashing at the house as Mara and Dean sat inside, eating dinner, waiting for the storm to intensify. The work that Wes and his crew had done made all the difference, Mara hoped. Dean assured her that the work that Wes and his crew had done made all the difference. Dean offered that we'll probably take some damage. There's no way around that. With plantation properties and big-time storms, that's just simply how it goes. Mara sat there looking at the now seemingly small house that once felt super huge, but in a raging storm with tropical downpour outside, she felt like it was almost claustrophobic. What are we going to do if something happens? Mara asked. Well, if something happens, we'll simply do our best to shore it up, and as soon as the storm passes, then we'll deal with it. Just then, a ripple of thunder cascaded across the sky, shaking the windows and making the house creak. At that moment, Mara scooted her chair next to Dean. She said, I've been through tons of thunderstorms in Seattle, but this is different. Of course, I'm in a big old concrete apartment, so there's no real impact. Exactly. Dean reached over and pulled her in and grabbed her shoulder or caressed her shoulder as he pressed her in tight and said, it doesn't matter how old you are, when you're in an old house like this and the thunder rages, all of a sudden you feel like a 7-year-old. She gave him a dirty look, and he pulled his hand back and put it in a defensive posture with his hands out and said, whoa, hey, me too. Even though I've done this many times facing storms, that doesn't mean it doesn't get my hairs to stand up on end. And with that, he brushed the back of his neck against his t-shirt that he'd been wearing working all day. They hadn't cleaned up yet and were famished because they wanted to finish eating before setting down for the night. They weren't sure exactly what was going to happen as Glenn, Maro's uncle, had taken care of the house in the last storm. Kenji said that there was damage, but he couldn't quite recall exactly what it was, other than a few trees fell down and crashed into the house, but nothing too severe had happened. Once they finished their dinner and were cleaning up in the sink, a lull in the storm happened where everything quieted down, and then the rain began just simply drizzling down, dripping off the eaves of the house and running down the gutters and the chains. Dean said, I'm very thankful that your uncle had installed those gutters so he could channel the water away from the house. Otherwise, it'd be sheeting down and starting to tear up the decking that we just finished up. What do you mean? Wouldn't it just drip off the edge of the roof? As Dean picked up another pineapple emblazoned plate and grabbed the white bristle brush from the sink and scrubbed it with detergent, he shook his head and said, no, actually, with that type of rain and that amount of water, it'll actually run off the shingles wrap around and start running around the deck. I've seen properties do that, or I've seen places do that where there was no gutter, and oh my gosh, the damage was unbelievable. So my uncle, Mara considered for a moment as she began drying the dishes that Dean had washed, basically saved us a lot of trouble. Pretty much. Dean smiled at her. Without your uncle's efforts, this place would probably just be a scrap heap and there would be nothing left to save. But the effort that he put into this means that we have a property and something worth saving. Just then a lightning flash shone through the window, and a fraction of a second later, the boom happened that rattled the entire house, with the cups clinking against each other inside the cabinet. Mara jumped and screamed momentarily. Dean looked at her with concern in his eyes and said, "You okay?" and asked her, "Are you okay?" And that one must have been right overhead. Did that strike the ground, do you think? Did it explode a tree? And Dean thought about it for a moment and then said, "No, if it would have exploded a tree, we would have heard the tree exploding. I've never seen it, but I've seen plenty of those explosions on social media." And, let's see. And most of those lightning strikes are cloud to cloud. What do you mean cloud to cloud? I thought lightning always crashed down. No, actually, most of the time it doesn't. She paused, wiping the plate with a white Hawaiian dishcloth. See, a patterned white dishcloth with pineapples on it. And she looked at him. "Are you a meteorologist now? What other skills do you have?" Dean ignored her for a moment as he finished up the last plate, scraping the food off, and said, "No, I'm not a meteorologist, but I've been through this a few times. You just pick up stuff as you go along." So basically, in my sheltered life, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. I hate to admit it. Dean paused and looked at her, and then picked up a tiny piece of soap sud and tapped it on her nose playfully. And he smiled at her and said, "No, in fact, that's just a function. I've been around on this earth a couple more years than you have, and you had a very different career path than I did. I've been outside most of my life until the last few years." "True, I've been out hiking," she said, as she wiped down the plate that Dean finished cleaning and put it into the drying rack. She dried the plate off and then put it into the cabinet. "Yeah, I've been out hiking and I've experienced that, backpacking a little bit, but not the day by day. I'm definitely a office girl." Nothing wrong with that. With that, they finished the dishes and walked over to the couch to listen to the boom and showers fall down. They sat there on the couch, snuggled up with one another, their phones. Let's see. Mara began working on her phone, and Dean suggested, "Hey, just a thought. If we lose power, we're not going to be able to charge up our phones. We're going to want those for an emergency. So, not to tell you don't mess with your phone, but..." And he paused and looked at her, and she said, "All right, don't mess with my phone. What are we going to do?" she asked. "We're going to pretend like it's 1992 and just sit here, maybe read or something. I know it's tempting, but these old places with those power lines, if they go down, we could be dark for a couple days." "A couple days," she called out. Just then another ripple of thunder came across the landscape and rumbled across the house. Mara feeling the rumbling, the thunder in her chest. She reached up and touched the center of her chest and said, "Wow, that was unreal. Does everything creak in this house every time?" "It's actually pretty normal. Dean said. Even in nice, big, brand new homes, you cannot avoid the creaking from a storm this powerful. Just then, no. As they sat there staring at the paintings in the room with a couple of flashlights at the ready, the rain began lashing harder and harder at the house. They heard it actually go under the eaves and begin pattering at the bottom of the window. At that, Mara hopped up and looked over at the window and said, "How in the world is the rain getting into the window? We've got a 6-foot wide deck. The wind is really that strong." "You gotta be kidding me." "See for yourself," Dean suggested. With that, Mara stood up and padded over to the door in her socks and her leggings and sweatshirt and her Maui shirt she picked up the previous day. "Okay," she opened the door. Immediately, as she opened the door, a gust of wind pulled it from her hand, or almost pulled it from her hand, and yanked her outside. She stumbled onto the deck, and the moment Dean saw that, he leapt to his feet to run and catch her as she got pulled around. He ran out onto the deck and caught her and held the door at the same time. As she almost tumbled from the force of the door pulling her out. She screamed while Dean yelled, "Whoa," as he grabbed her bodily and picked her up. His socks slid on the wet decking and they both went crashing down. He held her body above his, so as they fell down, he took the brunt of the impact while she was padded by his body. They slid to a stop as a wall of water blew into the decking and completely drenched them in moments. At that, they both stared at each other, Mara laying on his chest, as though they were going to make love on the deck in a raging storm. Dean reached up with his head and kissed her momentarily and held her close, and then said, "All right, enough fooling around on the deck. Let's go get a room instead." With that, he rolled over and lifted Mara up. She was already shivering from the adrenaline pump of the impact and the shock of being absolutely drenched in moments. They wrenched the door back closed and locked it. The screen door. The screen door had taken damage in that when she had opened the door, and she didn't even realize it. It was so rough. They pulled the screen back door as hard as they could and latched it, and then got the door closed behind it. Oh, that's not going to work. I'll have to work on that. Okay, note to self, work on the door action correctly. As they stood inside, completely dripping wet, Mara looked at Dean and said, "I now believe you. I humbly stand corrected." Dean simply shrugged and put his hands to his side and said, "Oh," and he turned around, walking down the hall, and went and got towels. 2 hours later, it had gone completely black, and once they had dried themselves up and made love with the rumble of the thunder shaking the house, adding to the experience of something they both wanted, they again sat on the couch in the room, listening to the shock of the rain outside. Just then they heard a boom and a crash. Mara jumped up and screamed again, and Dean said, "Do you do that every time? Let's go check it out." They walked back to Glenn's room and saw pieces of broken glass all across the room, with rain being driven into the bedroom. "Holy crap," Mara yelled out. The wind was blowing her hair around out of control as it pushed into the window. "Hey, a branch must have broken off and flew in here," Dean said, and sure enough, they looked behind the bed, and a rough branch, thick enough branch, had come through the window. He said, "We've got some pieces of plywood. I've got the drill and driver in the work shed. We're going to have to go out there and get it. Are you sure it's not dangerous?" "Oh, it's dangerous. I'll go get the plywood. You get ready with the drill. Get yourself all bundled up." In a few moments, they'd completely changed their clothing. They both had their rain jackets on, and Dean took the flashlight and stumbled out into the storm towards the work shed. Mara yelled out for him, "Be careful," as she shined a flashlight on him as he disappeared into the darkness. 2 minutes later, he came back, fighting the wind, holding a piece of plywood, and said, "This is all I found. It should fit." As he came back, he was completely dripping wet and stumbled up onto the deck. Mara helped him hoist the plywood up against the window on the back side of the house, and she handed Dean screws as he drilled it into the frame of the house. What had been a fun and mildly tepid night had turned into a real ordeal. Once they got the window plywooded up, they they forced their way back into the house, the screen door now dangling even worse, and got inside. They both plopped down on the wooden chairs in the kitchen, setting the drill down and the tools, and just breathed in and out. For a long moment, they sat in silence as they heard the rain lashing against the building, each quiet and collecting themselves. Well, that was exciting. Good thing we had some plywood left over from Wes and his crew. Mara's eyes were still wide, and she looked at Dean, breathing heavily. "That was insane. I can't believe you actually went out there and did that. I mean, you literally probably saved part of the house. That's just what we needed to do, Mara. It's not something I wanted to do, but here we are." Impressive. With that, she leaned over and kissed him, and then grasped his hand and said, I don't want to say the L word, but that is one of the most impressive things I have ever seen." Perfect. Okay, that was chapter 31, the storm scene on Maui in the plantation house. As you can see, things got pretty exciting there, and the goal is to add the ultimate tension and create the darkest night moment. Of course, that's how I write romance, to bring you along this wild adventure, because I do destination romance, as you can see with my Maui Desire Series and Golden Dusk at McKenna. I enjoy writing destination romance to take you to these places that I have been, or mostly have been. I've been to Maui, I don't know how many times, but I'm very blessed to be able to do that. And then write romances and also thrillers at aaronrlinsdau.com to bring to you so you can experience the location. And I do a lot of location as character, because clearly Maui is trying to thrash our hero Dean and our main female character and heroine Mara. Thank you very much for watching. Please check out links below to Island Dawn at Maui and the Maui Desire Series. Thank you very much, and please like, comment, and subscribe.